Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Backyard Forestry. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the fungal ecology of New Jersey with our presenter, Jason Hafstad. He's a trustee of the New Jersey Mycological Association, and he is statewide preserve manager ecologist for the New Jersey Natural Lands Trust, where he's responsible for more than 100 nature preserves throughout New Jersey, spanning 30,000 acres. He was previously with the Endangered and Threatened Species Unit of the NJDEP. We have some warnings tonight, a little different than usual, because we're going to be talking about mushrooms a little bit during the process, and we want you to know that it is dangerous to randomly pick mushrooms without confirming with an expert or multiple experts that they are indeed considered edible and safe. And even those that are considered edible and safe may cause reactions in individuals. So you need to be especially careful when picking mushrooms in the wild. We also have some numbers here for poison control. This is a very common type of notice given when we're talking about fungal matter in the forest, in particular mushrooms. And obviously, we also have local poison control centers that you may call. There's a little notice about foraging, again, on public lands, private lands. In general, in New Jersey, foraging for mushrooms on public lands is generally not permissible, but you can contact the particular owner of that land, agency responsible for that land, to find out if they do allow it. In the case of private lands, we suggest that you obtain specific permission from the owner of that property. And for owners of property, we suggest that if you do grant permission, you have a properly drafted grant of permission that protects you from any liability and also has a fixed duration. And it would be recommended to consult your professional advisors to get that prepared. I wanted to say a big thank you to Ben Pisano for last month's presentation. It is now our most watched video, exceeding, I think, 3,000 views on our YouTube page, and you can watch that video there. Everybody seems to really be enjoying these webinars. We're getting huge amounts of people signing up and watching the videos, and we're very encouraged by it. And we ask you to join the association. If you can do so, it would be much appreciated. And now, mushrooms, I call it edible toxic rare, and fungal ecology in New Jersey with Jason Hafstad. The floor is yours, Jason.
All right, thanks. Let's see. All right, can you see my screen?
It's up. Need to
see if this works. Let me share a different screen. All right.
Perfect.
So, fungi of New Jersey. Hi, everybody. I'm here representing the New Jersey Mycological Association to talk about fungi of New Jersey. So, just to begin, fungi is a kingdom of life, separate from plants and animals and other kingdoms of biology. There are a lot of fungi in the world and in New Jersey. So it's helpful to break up fungi into smaller categories to try to conceptualize and understand and organize all of the different species. So one way that I like to divide fungi up into smaller units is to think about the ecology of those fungi, how it obtains energy. Plants are able to photosynthesize. They can create their own glucose through photosynthesis. Animals are able to move throughout the landscape, so they're able to hunt and to forage. But fungi can do neither. So they've developed 4 strategies to obtain energy. The first category are mycorrhizal fungi. It's probably a term that many of you have heard. Mycorrhizal fungi are species that form mutualistic relationships with plants. The mycelial network of the mushroom will connect and exchange and barter nutrients with the roots of plants, including trees, but also other plant species. Orchids in particular are notable species that have a lot of mycorrhizal relationships. So the plant, the tree, will photosynthesize because it has access to the sun and send glucose and photosynthates down into their root system and through the mycelial network to essentially feed the fungus. And then in exchange, the fungus provides the tree with water and other nutrients from the soil. You'll see here a diagram that shows the difference between the mycelium and the fruiting body. It's important to remember that when you see a mushroom fruiting above ground, that mushroom is the fruiting body. It's just a reproductive structure that is releasing the spores. The actual body of the organism is that mycelial network underground. So you can think of the mushroom as like the fruit of an apple tree. If you pick the apple off of the tree, you're not really removing the body of the organism, you're just removing the reproductive structure. So when you pick a mushroom out of the ground, you're leaving behind the mycelial network, which is really what's important. That will continue to fruit. It's more likely that you will harm a population by stepping on the mycelium and compressing it and compressing the soil, then you'll harm a population by collecting too many fruits or fruiting bodies. Still, you don't want to over collect from a population. You want to allow those spores to disperse, but that mycelial network underground is really the body of the organism. Here you can see a photo of Amanita. That's an example of a mycorrhizal mushroom. So that's the first strategy that fungi have developed to obtain energy. The second one are wood decay fungi. These are fungi that will break down and recycle dead material in nature. Logs, stumps, snags. These are fungal species that colonize dead hosts. So they're not really harming the host because the host is already dead. They're just there to essentially clean it up and recycle those nutrients. So we can call that relationship commensalism because the fungus is benefiting and the host is neutral and neither benefits nor is harmed. Up here on the right is a species you may be familiar with. This is chicken of the woods, choice edible that can be found here in New Jersey. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. The third example of fungi obtaining energy are parasitic fungi. These are fungi that infect living hosts and obtain their energy through theft or, in some cases, killing the host. So on the left, you see some brown mushrooms growing out of sphagnum. These are mushrooms that parasitize living sphagnum. The genus for that mushroom is Sphagnurus, Sphagnurus paluster. And when you see, especially in an Atlantic white cedar swamp in southern half of the state, if you see a patch of sphagnum that's kind of brown and losing its color and it's not green anymore, it's kind of this beige, look for these brown mushrooms shooting up because it's probably being parasitized by that mushroom. This leaf spot is also a parasitic fungus. This is Phylosticta calmicola. Calmicola is named after its host, Calmia latifolia, or mountain laurel. This is a species that will colonize living leaves of mountain laurel. I've never seen it actually kill a mountain laurel, but it creates these leaf spots. Many parasitic fungi are highly host specific. And this is definitely an example where the species will only colonize mountain laurel. I don't think I've ever seen a sheep laurel with this fungus. Both of these two first species, the Sphagnurus paluster and the Phyllostycta calamicola, are native species. Even though they're parasitic, they have co-evolved with these native species, native host species, and are not ecologically harmful, even though they do potentially harm the host. This third photo on the right, on the other hand, is different. This is the fruiting bodies of Neonectria vaginata, which is beech bark disease. You may be familiar with the scars that it produces afterwards, but this is a non-native species that is invasive and harmful to native beech trees. So we do have invasive fungi, especially invasive parasitic fungi, but the vast majority of parasitic fungi in New Jersey are native. There are also a whole host of entomopathogenic fungi that are parasitic on insects, like this guy right here, parasitizing millipede or centipede, I forget which, and then these yellow fruiting bodies that are infecting or parasitizing this ladybug. Some more examples, Acanthamyces, parasitizing caterpillar, and this yellow fungus, Gibellula, which parasitizes spiders. As far as I know, Acanthamyces only parasitizes caterpillars, and Gibellula only parasitizes spiders. Again, parasitic fungi are typically host specific. So that's 3 strategies so far: mycorrhizal, saprophytic or wood decay, and parasitic fungi. The 4th strategy that fungi have developed to obtain energy are lichens. Lichens are fungi that have partnered with a photosynthetic algae or cyanobacteria. It creates a composite organism that has a layer of fungi with a photosynthetic algal zone in the middle. And I'll talk more about lichens a little bit later, but lichens are fungi. Even though it's a composite organism, we classify them as fungi according to the fungal partner, not the photosynthetic partner. But you can also break up fungi into categories based on their appearance or their morphology. Here's a table that I've compiled showing species by what we call the Baroni form group. Baroni is just the name of a mycologist, Tim Baroni, who's developed a somewhat standardized grouping of fungi by their growth form. And most of these numbers come from the club and their foray data, or from online publications. I say at least 2,469 species of fungi recorded for New Jersey, because that is a highly debatable number. It's intentionally conservative. The true number is probably north of 3,000, but it's very difficult to definitively say the species occurs here or not. There's a lot of taxonomic changes. A lot of species have been recorded, but there's no voucher to confirm the identity, in an herbarium somewhere. So this is definitely an undercount. But as you can see, the largest Baroni form group are the gilled mushrooms. This is probably what you think of when you think of a mushroom. They have gills on the underside of the cap with a central stem coming out of the ground. These gills are just an attempt to try to maximize surface area to volume ratio. It's trying to maximize the amount of spores that the mushroom can release. If this underside of the cap is completely flat, it wouldn't be able to release as many spores. The second largest group is lichens, or lichenized fungi, with 537 species reported from New Jersey. Many people have probably seen lichens. They are all around us. They grow on trees, on soil, on rock. Many people incorrectly believe that they are harmful to their substrate, actively try to remove them from especially trees. But they do not harm what they're growing on. In fact, if anything, they're beneficial. The exception is potentially cemeteries or tombstones, where a lot of people debate the extent to which rock-dwelling lichens will reduce or harm the lifespan of a tombstone. But in nature, they are not harmful to the host. Those of you in the Pine Barrens probably recognize a scene that looks like this, with these small mounds of a lichen in the genus Cladonia. You have several reindeer lichens, but people sometimes think this is a moss, but it is not. It is a lichen, and therefore a fungus, partnering with an algae to create energy. The third largest Baroni group is polypore, and these are sometimes also called bracket fungi. These are usually wood decay or saprophytic fungi, turkey tail, chicken of the woods, several other common names that people have probably heard of. And the underside of these mushrooms, or the spore-bearing surface, which we call the hymenium, has pores instead of gills. Again, just another strategy to try to maximize the amount of spores that are released by the fungus. The next largest group we have in New Jersey are the discomycetes, which are basically just little disc-shaped fungi. On the right here, we have a scutellaria, or an eyelash cup. You can see it has these hairs along the margin that look like eyelashes. And this is a wood decay species. And then over on the right here, we have one of the two species of Chlorociboria in New Jersey. And this is something that many people here have probably seen, although perhaps not fruiting. If you've ever seen a piece of wood in the forest that's stained with a blue-green color, that's this species. It commonly produces that blue-green stain on the wood, although it much less commonly produces these fruiting bodies on top of that stain. The next largest group is crust fungi, or corticioid fungi. These are fungi that typically can be found on the undersides of logs. If you want to find them, you have to roll logs over and examine the underside, which tends to be moist and dark. These are a poorly understood group of fungi. There are not enough people in New Jersey rolling over logs and looking for crust fungi, let alone collecting specimens of them and putting them under a microscope to examine them and identify them to species. One person from the New Jersey Mycological Association has taken a liking to crust fungi, Maricel Patino, and she's documented a lot of records and has found a lot of new species for the state. But she recently moved to Portugal, so the club is currently has a member vacancy for a crust expert. So if anybody is looking for a new hobby and wants to venture into a subculture of mycology, perhaps this is your new calling. The next group is myxomycetes. It's a fancy word for slime mold. Technically, these are not fungi, but mycologists have sort of adopted them and study them because nobody else will. These are species that tend to be found on wet or rotting wood. They like to, they are capable of moving. So they like to scramble along the surface of the log and eat up bacteria and other microorganisms. They shoot up these fruiting structures to release spores. But we have over 100 different species of myxomycetes. Again, a very understudied group with very little data or understanding of distribution or trends or data points or collections for New Jersey. The next largest group are the boletes. Boletes are mushrooms in the genus or the family Boletaceae. These are mushrooms with the central stalk coming out of the ground with pores on the underside. So unlike polypores that tend to be brackets, these are on a central stem coming straight out of the ground. And again, we have over 100 boletes in New Jersey. And these are a really fun group to study and to look for because they're one of the groups of fungi that don't require microscopy or the use of microscopes. Most of them can be identified using macro characteristics. And many of the boletes are also edible. We've got puffballs or earth stars. Some of these may look familiar to people. This one here in the bottom center, where you see 3 mushrooms coming out of a light brown puffball. That puffball in the middle is a scleroderma. Those 3 mushrooms that are coming out of the sides are boletes, and they are parasitic on just this genus of puffball. So the puffball is scleroderma, and then the 3 boletes that are coming out of it are Boletus parasiticus. We also have toothed fungi. So rather than having gills or pores, they have spines or teeth. Again, just another strategy for trying to maximize the amount of spores that a mushroom can release. Clubs or corals. Many of you have probably seen these. This is a difficult group to work with or to try to get down to a species level, but we have a pretty decent number of species in New Jersey. Jelly fungi, like this auricularia or witch's butter on the right. These tend to be kind of gelatinous and wet, kind of have this texture, bouncy, often found on decaying wood logs in the forest. We also have rusts and cankers. These are largely parasitic fungi that infect plants. On the left, we have Claviceps spartina, which has Spartina cordgrass as its host species. Again, if you want to find this particular fungus, this black smudge, you have to go to where Spartina is, largely in a salt marsh. In the center here, we've got this orange rust that is host specific on our native prickly pear cactus, Opuntia. This is a Phylosticta concavi. And then on the right, this orange rust is a species of Gymnoconia that is parasitic on rubus species or dewberries. All 3 of these fungi are native species that parasitize native plants. We also got chanterelles. A lot of these are well known because there are some notable choice edibles in the chanterelle group, including trumpets and chanterelles proper. And then the last group that I'll talk about, zygomycetes. These are the same group that have bread molds. These tend to be decay species, but rather than decaying wood, they decay sometimes mushrooms, like this species on the right. Even mushrooms need to get recycled and broken down. So there are molds that will attack mushrooms in the forest. This one on the left is Phycomyces blakesleana that will break down animal scat. This one on the left, I believe, is river otter scat, and this one in the middle is bear scat. So there are lots of fungi in New Jersey, lots of diversity, and there are lots of field guides that can help you try to identify what you find in the forest or out in nature. Unfortunately, with mushrooms, because they're such a diverse group, there isn't just one book that identifies them all. Many of the books that are relevant to our area are highly specific on a group of fungi, including sometimes just a genus like tricholomas. It's a whole book just for the genus Tricholoma. You've got polypores. You've got what are called milk mushrooms. These are species in the genus Lactarius. So if you take a knife and you slice the gills, it exudes a sappy, milky substance. Boletes that I've talked about, wax caps. Ascomycetes is just a fancy term for a lot of the discomycetes and a lot of the tiny little wood decay mushrooms, not gilled mushrooms usually. And then a whole host of books for lichens. If you want to identify lichens and you're in North Jersey, I recommend the Field Guide to the Lichens of the Great Smoky Mountains. If you are trying to identify lichens on the coastal plain or the southern half of New Jersey, I recommend the Delmarva Lichens book. Urban Lichens is a really good book for urban areas. It has a lot of the most common species. It's much smaller and not as expensive as the others. The Brodo is the monster. This is the one for, lichens of North America, and is thick and large and heavy. And at this point, somewhat outdated, but it has really useful introductory chapters on lichen ecology. But if you're more interested in lichen ecology rather than lichen identification, I recommend this book here, Robert Lucking's book, which just came out maybe a few months ago or last year, The Lives of Lichen in Natural History. And then this book, Medicinal Lichens, just came out, I believe, a few months ago. So if you want to get into mycology, you will most certainly have a growing library of books. But to get started, I recommend these two books here, Mushrooms of Northeast North America by George Barron and Mushrooms of the Northeastern United States and Eastern Canada by Tim Baroni. These two books have relatively comprehensive coverage of the most common species that you're likely to find in New Jersey, and are the best place to start if you don't know what you have and you're just getting into identifying mushrooms. Again, if you want to get into lichens, one of these two books, depending on where you are in New Jersey, is your best bet to start off with. And then there's also a really helpful 2-volume set, Fungi of Temperate North America, that's excellent and is still largely relevant to New Jersey and North America, even though it's written by and of European species. I prefer volume 2, and I use that for a lot of the smaller nondescript things that I don't even know where to start. Most of volume 1 has things that have other North American relevant books that are better to use, but a lot of the smaller nondescript things that are inconspicuous, which are the things that I tend to gravitate towards. Volume 2 of this Fungi at Temperate Europe is an excellent resource. There are also tons of recommended websites out there. I'll call out 3 that are particularly useful. The bolete filter, which includes a synoptic key for North American boletes, specific to boletes, but it's extremely helpful and well done for identifying boletes. Mushroom Expert has a wide range of species that it covers, including many of the common species. If you Google the scientific name or the common name of any mushroom in New Jersey, if it's on mushroomexpert.com, that profile page is usually one of the first search results, and has photos and species descriptions, and in some cases keys. It's mostly run by a mycologist named Michael Kuo, and it's an invaluable resource that many expert mycologists will use. And then MycoQuebec is another really helpful website. The only problem, as you might have guessed with the name MycoQuebec, is the whole website is in French. So you either need to be able to read French or translate the page using your internet browser to English, which when you're trying to translate technical mycological terms to English can create some interesting translations. But if you want to get into learning how to identify mushrooms, I highly advise the first thing you do is join the New Jersey Mycological Association. Membership is $10 per year, and there's a whole host of resources that will be available. Most notably, and my favorite being weekend mushroom forays, where we go to a site on the weekends from June through November, and we meet at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we split up or go out in groups for 2 hours with mushroom baskets, and we just collect all of the mushrooms that we can find from the park or preserve or wildlife management area that we are visiting. We always obtain a scientific collection permit from the property we are going to, and in exchange for that permit, we submit a species list to the managing entity. So it's basically like a little miniature fungal bioblitz. We're not there to collect species to eat or to forage. We're there to conduct citizen science inventories of the fungal biodiversity. So we collect mushrooms from 10 until noon, and then at noon we meet back at picnic tables or a central location, and we take out books, and there are experts there to help you identify. We create species tags for everything that we collect, and we lay them out onto a final ID table. And it's invaluable to be able to go to one of these things and see so many different mushrooms all identified all at once on display at a table. On a good day, we can document upwards of 150 species in that two-hour window. On the right here, I have a map of New Jersey showing the location of all of the forays for the year 2025. And the first foray will first foray of the year will be in a week and a half up at Stokes State Forest. So forays are members only. So if you're interested, join the club, and you'll have access to the schedule on our website. We also have what we call Taxonomy Tuesdays, where we meet over Zoom every single Tuesday from 7 to 9 p.m. And we help each other identify mushrooms that we found during the week. We take turns sharing our screen, and it's really helpful to listen to the more advanced mycologists walk through how they identify species and talk about what people find throughout the week. During the slower months in the winter, we usually have themed nights where we pick a topic or a genus, and we usually have a little introductory presentation that somebody does, and then we all share things from the year or that we found that are relevant to that topic. If anybody here is interested in edible mushrooms, you can watch the Taxonomy Tuesday recording from February 16th, 2021 on the New Jersey Mycological Association's YouTube page. You don't need to be a member of the club to see the recordings of Taxonomy Tuesday, but you do need to be a member to attend them live. The club also has a large festival that we call Fungus Fest that we put on every 2 years. We put it on last in 2023, so it's up again for 2025. This year it'll be on Sunday, October 12th, and it's always held at the Frelinghuysen Arboretum in Morristown, and usually has lots of activities, table exhibits, talks, walks, etc. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And we also have workshops and events throughout the year, including mycophagy and culinary and cultivation workshops with people in the club. Another really helpful resource to use to learn about fungi is iNaturalist. Many of the people who attend the Taxonomy Tuesday sessions will add their observations and photos to iNaturalist, and then when it's their turn to share, they just shared the iNaturalist page on their computer. But most of you are probably familiar with this app and website, but if you're not, this is definitely a useful tool to get an initial ID and to keep track of what you see, what you find, especially on your property. But there's a learning curve with how to photograph mushrooms in order to get a proper ID. And this is something that folks at Taxonomy Tuesday will be able to help you with. For example, the way that the gills attach to the stem is often really critical, something that a lot of people do not photograph when they're out in the wild. You know, if you're lucky, they'll take a photo of the underside of the cap. Sometimes they'll just take a picture from the top and ask you to identify it based on the top of the cap. But these little ID tricks based on the group of fungus you're working with just takes time and experience to know how to photograph, what to do, whether or not you have to slice the mushroom in half and get a cross section to get a precise look at the gills, or to get a close up of the surface of the stem, or whatever is needed to identify that particular species. Oftentimes, especially with gilled mushrooms, you need to take a spore print. This is just, you take the mushroom, you put it on a piece of paper, usually you cover it with some type of container, and you allow the spores to fall onto the paper so that you can see what the color of the spores are. Some field guides are organized by the color of their spore print. Sometimes the spore print is white, sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's got a little bit of orange, sometimes it's light brown, dark brown, and that's usually a really important identifying feature that if you don't know, it's almost impossible to identify the mushroom. If you've gotten this far and you're regularly going outside collecting mushrooms from the wild and doing spore prints, I'm sorry to say it's too late for you. You've fallen down the rabbit hole and there's no turning back. And before you know it, you've purchased a microscope and you're looking at spores and doing more advanced microscopy. As you can see, you can tell a lot about a mushroom by examining the spores, especially the color of the spores, the shape of the spores, the size of the spores, and for many species of mushrooms, it's impossible to even get down to a family or a genus if you don't do microscopy and examine the spores for all of these different traits. And they can be quite beautiful when you look at them under a microscope. Most people don't dive that far down into mushrooms, though. A lot of people just get interested in the species they can eat. And as long as they can identify a few common choice edible mushrooms that are difficult to mistake with anything else, they're perfectly content. These are a few common choice edible fungi that can be found in New Jersey, edible fungi. Chick of the woods on the left here, oyster mushrooms, what are called beefsteak mushrooms, this red one, lion's mane on the right here, and then morels on the bottom left. And it's probably a good time to reiterate some of the disclaimers that Rich said in the beginning. First, never eat a mushroom unless you're confident in the ID. Second, if it's the first time eating a particular species, start small, eat a little bit. Everybody reacts differently to mushrooms. So if it's a mushroom that you've never tried before, you do not want to eat a full plate of it all at once the first time. Start small, work your way up. Different people can react differently to even species that are commonly eaten. Third, just because a fungus is edible, the species is edible, doesn't mean that where you're collecting it from doesn't have toxins in it. This is especially relevant for morels because a lot of people go hunting for morels in old abandoned apple orchards, which is a common place to find morels. It's a good place for those species to grow. The problem is many apple orchards used to be sprayed with arsenic-based pesticides, and that arsenic can leach into the morels, and you can get arsenic poisoning from eating those morels if there's arsenic in the soil. So be careful about eating mushrooms that are collected from areas that could have toxic soils, roadsides, or areas that are sprayed. Few more edible mushrooms. We've got the Boletus edulis, which typically grows under hemlocks or more commonly Norway spruce, especially in lawns, very common species to find. Giant puffball grows in the woods. Down here on the bottom left, a species for folks in South Jersey. This is a Tricholoma magnivelari, that grows in the Pine Barrens, sandy soil. And then of course chanterelles that many people are familiar with. The species on the right, this is chaga. This is a hard mushroom that parasitizes or grows, or I don't know if it's a parasite or a wood decay, but it grows out of birch trees. And although you cannot eat it, and it's technically not edible, I included it because a lot of people will harvest this to make tea. But there are certainly poisonous fungi out there. Probably the most poisonous and most deadly mushroom that we have in New Jersey is this one on the left here, this white mushroom, Amanita bisporgyra, which is called the destroying angel. In the second one here, we have the Galerina marginata. This Morchella species is sometimes confused with morels. So that's one to be cognizant of if you're out hunting for morels. And then this one on the right, Chlorophyllum mollidites, is called the vomiter and is very common in mulch beds and in lawns. I have it in my lawn. Typically has scales on the cap and greenish bluish tinge to the gills and underside. Poisonous fungi are never so poisonous that you cannot handle or touch the mushroom. They're only poisonous if you consume them. So if you go to a mushroom foray for the club and you've got mushrooms that are all displayed on the table and you're worried about touching them, you don't need to be. You can always touch a mushroom, even the deadliest mushroom you can touch with your hands. Some mushrooms are, deadly poisonous. Others are poisonous, but will mostly just result in digestive discomfort, depending on how much you consume. But not only are fungi poisonous for people, but also for pets, sometimes children. There are Facebook groups that you can get emergency identifications on if you're worried that your dog may have consumed a mushroom, or you can post photos to get ID if you're worried about poisonous mushrooms in your yard. We also have invasive fungi in New Jersey, non-native invasive fungi. We've already seen this one on the left. This is the fruiting bodies of the beech bark disease. There's also this one in the middle that's called chestnut blight. Many people here are probably familiar with. On the right, we have crust fungus with teeth called Radiolomyces copelandii. This is a wood decay species that was introduced from Asia. And I've heard people debate whether or not it is invasive because it is a wood decay fungus. It breaks down wood, coarse woody debris in the forest, which some people will argue is ecosystem service. We want that wood to decay so that it can be recycled and returned to the forest and be reused. But I call it invasive because one, it's non-native, and two, we have a whole host of native species that rely on rotting logs. So if we have an invasive species coming along and speeding up or speeding up the decay of logs or displacing native wood decay species, then it is having a detriment to the forest ecosystem. I'm sure I don't have to tell people here that coarse woody debris in a forest is absolutely critical. So anything that speeds up the decay of that coarse woody debris and removes that habitat from not just fungi, but salamanders and other species is certainly, in my books, an invasive species. We also have rare fungi in New Jersey. I'm going to start by talking about lichens because that's a group of fungi that I tend to gravitate towards and focus on. We most certainly have rare fungi in New Jersey, but we don't have any endangered fungi in New Jersey. And the distinction is that with plants and animals, we have legislation that legally authorizes the DEP to promulgate a list of endangered species and afford regulatory protections to them. We don't have that with fungi. So until the legislature passes a law and signed by the governor that authorizes the establishment of state endangered fungi, we will not be able to list them in an official capacity. But that doesn't make them any less rare. We can do scientific inquiries and try to determine which species are at least deserving of some conservation status or legal protections. And that's something that I've tried to do with lichens. I've gone through all 537 species of lichens in New Jersey and assigned a rarity rank for what I think the species should be. I followed the NatureServe ranking protocol using S ranks that we use for plants. SH means state historical. These are species that were known historically from New Jersey. There are collections and herbaria and records that suggest that it was present in New Jersey at one point. But we have not found it in a long time, and we have no known extant or existing populations in the state. So we have 77 lichens that were known historically from New Jersey, but are potentially extirpated and are no longer present here. S1 is present in New Jersey. There are known extant populations in the state, but it's extremely rare, probably deserving of state endangered status, roughly having fewer than 5 populations statewide, known populations statewide. S2, slightly more common, but still rare, maybe between 6 and 20. That's the cutoff that we use with plants. I've estimated about 47 species for that category. And then S3, these are roughly species that are considered species of concern, species that are rare, not as rare as the S1s and the S2s, but still worth tracking and recording and protecting if possible. And then 263 species that I ranked as S4 or S5. So these are species that are common or uncommon, but not rare, and likely not deserving of any conservation status. And then I also expanded to include a list of what I call BOLO species, be on lookout. These are species that have never been recorded from New Jersey, but are known from nearby, just over the state line in upstate New York or eastern Pennsylvania or down in Delaware, species that are known north and south of New Jersey, but not in the state. So things that could potentially be out there and that people should be looking for, but we have no confirmed records for them in the state yet. Non-lichenized fungi is a much larger group of species and one that's much more difficult to do a complete assessment of. Again, using the same status or S ranks, I've tried to start to assign rankings. SH, S1, S2, S3, 804 that I'm confident are not rare. That at least we can say, these species are abundant in New Jersey and secure and not rare. SU just means uncertain. They're probably rare, maybe rare. We don't have enough data to really pin it down, but it's probably somewhere in the SH to S3 range. And then, a large group of 747 species that, I don't even know where to begin. It's such a obscure species and we have so little data, not just in New Jersey, but for Eastern North America that, there's just no way to even begin to understand whether or not it's rare or common or declining. Some of the rare species in New Jersey are exceptionally rare, and I am confident they are rare. One of them is Echinodontium beluii. This is a species that will colonize old growth Atlantic white cedar. It was first collected from New Jersey in 1908 and 1909. This is where it was discovered, growing on Atlantic white cedar in the Forked River, New Jersey area. It was formally described as a new species in 1909. Hadn't been seen anywhere else in the world until 2006, when it was found up in New Hampshire, again, growing on Atlantic white cedar. It's since been found down in Florida. It was found down in Florida last year, but has not been found in New Jersey, despite the fact that it was first discovered here since 1908. So this is something that I'm always on the lookout for when I'm in Atlantic white cedar swamps, especially out in the Pine Barrens. Old growth Atlantic white cedar is exceptionally rare. So possible that the species is no longer in the New Jersey landscape, but I believe there are undiscovered populations out there somewhere. Some species are not rare globally, like the Echinodontium beluii, but are potentially rare in New Jersey just because we're kind of on the edge of their geographical range. I've spent a lot of time looking at iNaturalist maps of species and trying to find patterns for different species that are potentially rare. Here's an example of one, Spatulariopsis veludipes, which you can see has a more northern distribution with that, what I call Appalachian spur. It's got a northern distribution and then it can colonize the higher elevations down the mountains. Many of our plants have a similar looking geographical range. So even though it's not rare on the global scale, it's rare in New Jersey because it's restricted to just the edge of the state, and the state's on the edge of its range. Compare this range to a species like Calostoma rabanellii, which is a southern species that reaches its northern limit in New Jersey. This is a coastal plain species that I've seen in the Pine Barrens. Super common down south, but once you get up to the northern end of its range, it becomes much more rare. Hydnellum ceruleum is a really interesting species, one that I've never seen in person, but it's definitely a bucket list species for me. It's a toothed fungus. It's got a deep blue hue, and it produces this jelly-like guttation where it exudes this liquid on the surface of the cap. We do have a few other species that exude jelly like this, but this particular species, the blue ceruleum species, it appears to be pretty rare in New Jersey, potentially restricted to old growth forests, and it has both a normal northern distribution and a southern distribution, but has this what I call mid-Atlantic void, which is again a pattern that I've seen with other species, including lichens. And you tend to find with species that are restricted to old growth forest because of the extensive logging that has occurred in the mid-Atlantic region. Glonium stellatum is another species, not the most conspicuous species, but still one that's pretty cool looking. Seems to be rare throughout its range, potentially. I don't know how many people are out there looking for it or recognize it if they found it. But as far as I can tell, there's only a single population in New Jersey, in the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. It's a species I'm always on the lookout for. It's much smaller than this photo suggests. You know, this larger one may be the size of a quarter. So I have seen the Great Swamp population, and I was surprised that I wasn't expecting it how small it was going to be. But species that grows on rotting standing snags and logs in the forest. Another example, Crepidotus cinnabarinus. Again, kind of difficult to discern or interpret the overall geographical distribution of this species. For some reason, it doesn't seem to like Pennsylvania all that much, or the Finger Lakes region of New York, but it's found in New Jersey in a very small corner, in this up by the New York State border, Wawayanda area. Pretty distinct, these deep red gilled brackets that come out of rotting logs. But something to keep an eye out for, potentially a rare species in New Jersey. And then the last one, Angelina rufescens. Again, this is a unique looking species. It has these little scribble-like reproductive structures, again, growing on rotting logs. It might be larger in these photos than it is in real life. I've never seen this in person, but I suspect it's another one like the Glonium that would surprise me at how small it is. But this one, as far as I can tell, has only been found in two spots in New Jersey, at least according to iNaturalist. Again, Great Swamp, and then also Stokes, both species that tend to be fungal biodiversity hotspots for northern New Jersey. So
Jason, just a moment. There's an
Sure.
interesting question about climate change. Have you seen
Sure.
any changing patterns of presence of particular species as temperatures have risen?
I've certainly seen that with plants. I haven't noticed that as much with fungi, although it's much more difficult to know that with fungi because fungi tend to fruit based on precipitation and unreliably. So it's difficult to determine. We had a drought last year. Last year was not a good year to go out looking for mushrooms because it was so dry. So I expect that species that have a southern distribution that reaches its northern limit in New Jersey will probably become more abundant in the state as climate becomes warmer, and a lot of the northern species that reach their southern limit in New Jersey will be stressed and will either move north or will disappear because of the combination of the climate changes and other stresses that it has, much like we're seeing with plants.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So that's my presentation. I left plenty of time for questions. So I welcome everybody to put questions they may have in the chat. And let me
I see someone here who asked the question when they registered, which is, why do I see so few mushrooms on my 12 acres of woods? And
right.
is there anything that drives down a mushroom population in a woodland area?
Well, deer eat mushrooms. So if you have a lot of deer on your property, that may be contributing to the number of mushrooms in your forest. Dry conditions are also not good for mushrooming. The rule of thumb is typically 48 hours after a heavy rain is usually the sweet spot for going out and looking for mushrooms. Doubly so if there's been a prolonged drought and then you get a good rain. All of those fungi will have a bunch of pent up energy and will fruit prolifically following a drought. Season can also be a contributor. September and October are probably the 2 months that have the most prolific fruiting of fungi. You tend to not get as many mushrooms in the spring or during the heat of July. August can be pretty good, but usually September and October are the sweet spots. Right. Just looking through the chat for some of the questions. So how can we support legislation that grants fungi legal protections? If you want to reach out to your legislator and deal with the legislative process, you're all heart. It's something that is desperately needed, but there's currently a bill in the legislature that would afford plants additional legal protections. Even that's been a tricky thing to get approved. So I imagine fungi are going to be even more difficult. Perhaps they fruit after fire. So there are fungi that are specific to areas that have burned, especially in the pine barrens. It can be quite interesting to go out to areas that have burned and to look for mushrooms that are only found after fire.
So getting back to that mountain laurel question, you said it was not
Sure.
harmful to the plant.
Right.
Is there any way to treat it, or is it advised not to treat it?
Yeah, I wouldn't treat it. It's harming the mountain laurel in the sense that it is taking nutrients from it, but it doesn't kill the mountain laurel. I've never seen a mountain laurel die from it. Lots of things are parasitic and or consume another species. It's perfectly healthy. That's what happens in nature. Bobcats will hunt prey. That doesn't make them harmful to the ecosystem.
Okay. There's a question here about the pine barrens. What month is the best month for mushroom hunting in the pine barrens?
Probably also September and October.
So, and is it possible to artificially create a habitat for wild fungi growth?
Um, to artificially create a habitat. I mean, it's one of those things where if you have healthy habitat, if you build it, they will come. I don't know of anything you can do specific to fungi. Certainly you want to leave coarse woody debris in the forest for saprophytic species, and you want to try to keep deer out, and try to reduce soil compaction for mycorrhizal species. Many of the rarer species, like old growth forests, are highly sensitive to disturbance. So minimizing disturbance in the older forests of New Jersey is probably critical. Certainly not something we need to do for all of our forests, but um, certainly the oldest forest should be managed for old forests and the fungi and other species that are dependent on them.
And in a young forest habitat, do we see particular species more present than others?
Certainly true for plants. I don't know if I've come across fungi that tend to prefer younger forests. Um, Many of the old growth forest or wood decay species that will only decay large, dense, coarse woody debris. So when you're talking about, fungi that depend on a particular age class of a forest, it's usually on the older side, not the younger side, because it has that coarse woody debris. Younger forests, um, are usually so dense with vegetation, um, and they don't have a lot of uh, a lot of the slash and things that are present are small twigs and stuff. So yeah, it's a good question.
As we've talked about in the past, prescribed burn is really a big topic today. People, especially with the forest fire situation, attempting to use it as a management tool to reduce risk of wildfire. What is the impact of prescribed burn on fungi?
um I'd say little to none. Most of the species that occur in the pine barrens where a lot of the prescribed fire occurs, are species that have co-evolved with fire for, many, many years. Fire typically does not reach down deep into the soil as much as people would think. So it really doesn't affect the mycorrhizal networks underneath. Um, the critical thing with prescribed fire is, ecologically is burning through that duff layer and exposing mineral soil, which is where you're going to see a lot of the mushrooms coming up. I don't see as many mushrooms in the pine barrens growing in the dense ericaceous understory of forest. They're usually in bare sand or along the roadsides and that sort of thing.
There's a question here about mushrooms in the lawn. I know earlier you mentioned that brown mushroom as being an edible, and I thought you mentioned they might grow in lawns when I was listening.
Yeah, the Boletus edulis that grows often grows under Norway spruce and lawns.
Mhm. And that is an edible mushroom,
Yep.
but be very careful in identifying it, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, boletes tend to be pretty safe. I don't know of any poisonous boletes. There are certainly bitter boletes out there, or boletes that are not palatable, but um, I can't think of any poisonous boletes.
Just scrolling down the list to see if there are any questions of general interest. Oh, here's a good one. Can you, with respect to farming mushrooms, purposely farming, could you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that and how that's done, what's involved?
Yeah, so a little bit, we have cultivation workshops in the New Jersey Mycological Association by people that are much more experienced and knowledgeable in that sort of thing than I am. But a lot of them will take mushrooms and basically create an inoculant, and then they'll use a syringe and they'll just uh, inoculate logs of the appropriate host tree in their backyard, and they'll just fruit right out of the wood. So if you have trees that get cut up into stump sized, and you just lay them out and you drill holes in it, you can inoculate them with edible mushrooms, and they'll fruit. I'm sure it's not that simple.
And
There's
that's those sources of those are available online.
yeah, you could purchase the inoculants of different species, or you can find them in the wild and create your own mixture. Uh, I I think somebody said they you just put them in a blender with some solution like milk and something else, and they make their own inoculant, and they inoculate wood in their backyard, and are pretty successful with it. Again, you got to keep them away from deer, just like a vegetable garden. But
Are there any downsides to store-bought mushrooms?
um, not that I can think of. You mean like store bought, edible, not the typical portobellos that you get in the shop, right? But um, yeah, I mean, local is always better, with anything. Um, but the advantage to purchasing them is that you're confident in the ID rather than trying to get it from the wild and grow it yourself.
Just scrolling down again, sorry. Okay. Well, I think we're in pretty good shape. Does anybody want to add any questions to the chat?
So there's one question here about purchasing mycorrhizal fungi to improve the growth of cultivated plants. Um, the extent to which this is useful in like a garden setting or in potting soil, I can't speak to, but um, a lot of those commercially available mycorrhizal species or mycorrhizal mixes um, can facilitate the spread of non-native species. A lot of those mixes only have a certain number of species, certainly not the full palette of what you'd expect to find in a forest. And because they're mass produced and shipped in areas, they're not guaranteed to be native species. So best not to use those commercial mycorrhizal inoculants in natural areas or in the wild unless you're confident in the species that are present in them. The fungi that grows on rubus, is there a way to promote its growth on multiflora rose? No, I think it's restricted to rubus. I don't think it will grow on rose. But multiflora rose does have its own pathogen. It could certainly be uh, more deadly to multiflora rose than it is. I guess it has some effect, but it certainly would be nice if it started to significantly beat back some multiflora rose bushes in New Jersey.
So I don't know whether you look beyond the United States, but have mushrooms or spores been found in extreme habitats such as mountains,
Um,
extreme cold habitats?
lichens are extremely adaptable to harsh environments. They've survived space. Astronauts take them up into space and bring them back down, and they continue to survive. That book by Lucking on the life history of lichens has a lot of good examples on uh, oddball lichens that have accomplished major feats by colonizing habitats that are quite inhospitable to other species.
This is an interesting question. Are there companion fungi to help native plants grow and thrive?
Mm, not that I can think of. I mean, probably, but nothing that you can or should be trying to engineer or introduce on your own. I mean, spores can travel pretty far. You know, they're out in the wild, in nature, in people's yards. So they can find their way to where they need to get to much more easily than seeds can. Um, in fact, there's some researchers over in Europe that I believe are taking air samples and doing DNA studies to analyze the spores that are being released in the air of forest and natural areas. Um,
Okay, and
so yeah,
one of the Forestry Association directors posted a couple of questions in the Q&A, pointed them that way. It says,
right.
how long do individual mushrooms live, and how often do they fruit?
Um, so it really depends on the mushroom. You know, some mushrooms are beefier and thicker. You know, boletes in particular, you know, tend to be pretty hardy and can last for several days. Other mushrooms can be much more short-lived if they're delicate or more moist. Um, so I'd say they last for, you know, upwards of a week, you know, depending on the conditions. In terms of how frequently they fruit, that's largely going to be dependent on the amount of energy stores in the mycelium and the amount of rain that we get.
The second part of that question was essentially trying to delve deeper and say, well, do they overwinter in some way, or are they gone when they're gone?
Well, the mycelium, you know, the mycelial network will overwinter. So, you know, it'll shoot up fruits again from the same mycelial body, uh, you know, the next year. So
Okay,
yeah, if you
and
go back to you know, if you have a population of an edible mushroom on your property and you go back, it'll reliably, you know, continue to fruit year after year.
have there been any successful transplantation of truffles from Europe to the United States?
That I don't know.
It's an interesting question, a very economically focused one as well.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems like that has been tried before. I imagine somebody's tried that.
They didn't bring the correct pigs to find them after they transplant them.
Yeah,
So I think we're in pretty good shape for the evening. I want to say thank you so much, Jason. You've just done an incredible job. I tried to keep track of all the different species in my head, but my old age caught up at some point, so I have to buy one of those books. Unfortunately, I photographed a page with the two you recommended, so I'll be ordering those tomorrow. And
cool.
I really, really enjoyed this. There's so this particular weather pattern that we're in has brought out so many different examples on my property that every day I'm finding something else and looking and trying to analyze, and just that it's so helpful also hear about how to properly photograph them to correctly identify them as well, because it's very difficult. Obviously, I have people send me tree things that are just a single shot and say, can you analyze this? Um,
Yep.
and it's very, very difficult to do that. So thanks for that. And really, the breadth of the presentation was what I loved, that touched on so many areas. And I know there's certain groups that say, "Oh, I'm going to learn all about edible mushrooms or inedible mushrooms or dangerous ones," but this was really a broad presentation and really opens one's eyes to the breadth of what you do every day.
Hmm.
So thank you so much. A
Yeah. Thank you guys.
lot of thank yous, a lot of thank yous coming up. So great job. So I say good night, and everybody have a good evening.
Good night, guys.